Hey guys, and thank you for joining us today for Cyber Talk with me, Julia Lee, Senior Manager of the Education and Center of Excellence Unit within the Cybersecurity Division of the Ontario Public Service. We are back for the new year, and I am so excited to kick off the show again. We have so much planned for 2023, and I hope you're all ready to join us as we bring monthly Cyber Talk episodes to you with special guests from all over the cyber industry. So to really kick things off, we'll be diving on some cyber predictions of 2023. If you're interested in knowing more about what we see really coming in the cybersecurity field this year, you better stick with us because we have a lot to discuss today. Today, we have a special guest that is not new to the Cyber Talk show. He has been here once and blew us all away with his cyber knowledge. So we knew we needed to get him back on the show so that he can share more with you all. Joining me today is Ali. He is the research and project lead at the AI Hub and Center for Cybersecurity Innovation at Durham College and has over 13 years of experience working on a variety of technology implementations for government, academia, and not-for-profit sectors. Good morning, Ali.
Good morning, and I don't know if you're still saying it, but Happy New Year.
That's right. Happy New Year. I was going to say that the rule of thumb is I'll say Happy New Year still to folks that I have not wished as of yet. How are you doing, Ali?
Well, going to snowstorm very soon. You should get used to that. But overall, it's been an interesting start from a cyber perspective to 2023. I'd say I'm doing like many other people are doing. There's a little bit of anxiety and an anticipation over what's to come. But with community support, you feel like you can get through it and continue to excel. So positive but cautious. That's how I'm doing right now.
That's a great segue into our theme today of just cyber predictions of 2023. And one of the topics that really came up, that keeps on coming up, sorry, and is a recurring topic is AI or artificial intelligence. And as technology continues to really improve, the capabilities of AI continue to grow and we know expands beyond our expectations. And actually, in a recent report from IBM, it states that AI is changing the game for cybersecurity as it becomes a solution to help the under-resourced security operations. So while using AI, it is able to create really threat intelligence from millions of research papers to blogs and news stories throughout the internet to really drastically reduce response times in cyber incidents. But on the other hand, we're seeing that threat actors are also taking advantage of AI in their attacks, right? I think you can probably agree with that one, Ali, by using AI-generated phishing emails and infiltrating AI-based products. But with that being said, my question to you, Ali, is how will automation and the potential displayed by OpenAI going to really impact cyber attacks and defenses?
Great question, and I'll answer this with 3 bullet points. The first thing that I'm going to say is it wouldn't be a session with me if I didn't throw out a quote. So here comes the quotes. Get your t-shirts ready. The first thing that I'll say is I saw this on LinkedIn where someone said AI is not going to take your job, but somebody who knows how to work with AI will. And I think this is a very important preface or a very important framework within which to answer this question. The first thing that I'll say is, along with this element of OpenAI and ChatGPT, I'll begin with this concept of what is something like a ChatGPT. For I know I have a lot of my students on who are studying AI, and I think all of them will understand, and any AI practitioner will understand that, look, whether it's AI or whether it's machine learning or whatever have you, its implementations in cyber are not new, and neither is the concept of something like a ChatGPT. ChatGPT caught everybody's attention by storm because of how effective and eerily human-like it is, and how accessible and scalable it is. But I think we need to peel away at the layers just to understand how exactly will it impact the cyber game. Because in 2018, 2019, when I got into the AI and cyberspace, we were already doing it then. We were already creating baselines and agents and looking at how AI can help you detect or predict future activity. So what exactly has changed now? Because this session, after all, is on cyber predictions. So the first thing I want everyone to understand is that with something like ChatGPT from a technical perspective, if we look at using AI in cybersecurity, will help you not just with writing code that can be malicious, meaning that it won't just focus on the syntax of the code. It can actually focus on more than the logic. It can, if you run a quick test on ChatGPT, it can potentially even help you write code that is contextually relevant. This is a very, very big difference. And this is where you see that seminal shift. You see, there's a big difference between coding and programming. When you code, you tell something what to do. When you're programming, you're making that something effective and you're making it contextually relevant. That's the difference between coders and programmers. And something like a chat GPT with that power in the NLP space, the natural language processing space, now has the ability to not just help you write malicious code, but make it contextually relevant as well. My prediction is we've been talking since last year about ransomware as a service, and because of, in some reports that you might read, because of the layoffs in tech, you're going to see bad hackers or just hackers in general out for hire. I think you're going to see them have tools that will help them make their code more contextually relevant. Yes, we can say phishing emails now won't have grammatical errors, sure, but there are other tools that could have helped you with that. I'm not going to endorse any of them because I don't necessarily think those are contextually relevant either, but there's more than just writing a phishing email accurate. There's going to be code that is going to be more effective, more precise, more contextually relevant, and from a timing perspective and a social engineering perspective, I feel used correctly by bad actors, you will see code that is so relevant and so precise and so timely that it will execute on payloads in a way that we haven't seen before. And yes, what do I think this is going to do? It's going to change the game in terms of how quickly code gets released. It's going to change the game in terms of how nimble the bad actors can be. And more importantly, it's really now going to put a strain, not just on the technical team, but the operational team, the management teams, the administrative teams, to really understand how your data or what your data tells you about your organization and how you need to be taking a defensive dev strategy. The game has not changed because we suddenly have AI in cyber. The game has changed because of the nature and the accuracy that you're now seeing and the speed at which it is delivering. So that's where I see some of these changes coming up. It's more than just syntax and logic. It's contextually relevant now, and it's not a spray and pray approach. So get prepared is my first message and my first prediction.
Thanks very much, Ali. And I do agree. That's a very important point of, it's definitely changing the game on the nature of attacks that we're seeing, but it's quite valuable to see things expedited, especially on the research front and the data-driven point. Following up to that, how do you see automation and the potential displayed by OpenAI really going to impact cyber attacks and defenses? If you can just expand on that a little bit more.
Yeah, so let's dive into this a little bit deeper, right? When you're talking about this element of how something like an OpenAI will expand, first I obviously spoke about if you run it yourself, you'll see that it has the ability to change your code and help you correct your code. So if you're doing Python scripting, Golang scripting, it can assist you with that. But there are two other areas where I feel that concepts like ChatGPT will change the game significantly. The first is you've got to realize that now the ability to find information and the ability to browse the internet and get information almost instantaneously when you're running, let's say, or trying to run something like a social engineering campaign has been made that much more easier. So I think that's going to change the way reconnaissance is done. That's going to change the way in which you gather information about your targets. That's number one. Number two, I am of the firm belief that when we look at cybersecurity, we need to take into account the cultural elements of cybersecurity. Here in Canada, we tend to stay focused within an English-speaking environment. And suddenly, when you look at something, the NLP capacities in ChatGPT, it's not neutral to English alone. You could see similar tools that come up in French, in Spanish, in other indigenous languages, in other languages that are used in the LATAM arenas, etc. This is going to change the scope dramatically. This is not about a Google Translate tool that just translates apples for apples. This is about a tool that is not just syntactically smart, but contextually smart. And the more you know about the cultural areas of what you're trying to target or where you're trying to target, the more effective your campaigns can be. So that's where I see these changes occurring. Now, someone could turn around and say, Ali, you're constantly looking at the side of people being attacked and ChatGPT and tools like this being used to launch attacks and by bad actors. Yeah, absolutely. The flip side is true as well. Can these tools be used to assist us from a defense perspective and a proactive defense perspective? 100%. Looking at integrations where you have something like a ChatGPT that complements the phishing awareness campaigns you might run, that complements the awareness campaigns that you run in general, a very good way. There's educational promotion there. There's an awareness piece that can be brought in with such powerful NLP products. Bear in mind, the idea of having a Siri-like skill is not unknown to us, but again, it comes down to the power of a tool like ChatGPT. But there's one more area where I feel that ChatGPT or tools like, this whole OpenAI movement, and I'm sure people will probably ask, the difference in automation and AI. The one other area that I will say where things are going to get very interesting from a proactive and a protection perspective is we have a lot of partners in the community, different, or we call them vendors. I refer to them as partners. Without them, you would not have some of the impressive products that we use. There was a time when you could go in and say, we are using AI to do this, right?
Mhm.
Now you're going to see even folks who may not have a graduate diploma or whatever in machine learning, you're going to see them asking for more details and those devils to show us how exactly does that work? At what point, at what data point does the AI kick in? When do you establish the baseline of my network? How do you reevaluate that baseline? What do you measure anomalous activities against? And people are genuinely now going to get more familiar with these concepts around, well, what is a false positive and what defines what is a false positive? I think you're going to see a much more, I wouldn't use the word educated populace when it comes to AI. You're going to see a much more curious populace when it comes to AI. And if we, especially with our awareness programs, are able to bring more training, more useful sessions around explaining AI from this perspective, I think it'll allow us to adopt AI tools for our protection in a much more refined manner and in a much more conscientious manner. I say this to everybody that deploys an AI-based product. AI is not another software you just deploy. It is a member of your org chart. It needs to be fed. It needs to be trained. It needs to have time when it's doing something else. It has to have metaphorical time off. There are many things we have to look at. So that's where I see, second prediction, that's where I see all of this going. And to those vendors and partners that use AI, I think your marketing teams have their work cut out in terms of educating and really pinpointing where the AI well and truly kicks in.
Absolutely. I love how you go through kind of what are the pros and cons, right? And we're definitely seeing, I love how you started off with some positivity for the new year here of using AI applications, but I think it is also a misconception of AI replacing cyber professionals. And I hear that, quite a bit on my side. But one of the potential applications of AI in cyber defense is really just to your point of enabling the setting up of self-configuring networks. And detecting those vulnerabilities. And if anything, it's helping us really improve our cybersecurity defenses and tools, such as through the social engineering programs that we've spoken about in previous shows. But we're definitely on our side here for the Ontario government. We're updating our ways, our KPIs, our baselines for social engineering attacks, and the way that we can start testing users, bringing it back to probably our next topic around the human factor of cybersecurity.
Yep.
All right. So I've been thinking about this question, Ali, for a bit and really wanted to bring it on the table for us to discuss and to get your perspective. We know that cyber criminals have really figured out profitable business models. They take on advantage of the online anonymity. So really, we're seeing a paradigm shift. It's really crucial to the effectiveness of current techniques and practices. And since the majority of cyber incidents are human-enabled, really human factors of cybersecurity, examining the link between attitudes towards cybersecurity and risky cybersecurity behaviors, it makes us question of, do you really understand, your own attitude to risk and that of your colleagues? Where does this really come from or stem from? And an individual's attitude towards risk can really become an important contributor to their decision making. And where I'm getting at with this is it really impacts making decisions about our governance and strategy planning when it comes to cybersecurity. What's your take on this?
Yeah, so again, I'll come forward with three layers, and I see some questions have already started coming in. So to those stakeholders of mine and students, good job, participation grade guaranteed. So I've said this many times before that when it comes to understanding risk, I first begin by defining it from my vantage point. There's risk and there's risky. Risky, and I'm being a little metaphorical here, is when you go down a particular path and there's no turning back from there. It's a very risky endeavor. Risk is you're going down a certain path, but you know how to come back to where you were relatively in some form of sanctuary, and you were relatively quote unquote safe and protected in some sort of a moat from a particular sort of situation or condition. I think there are three things that have driven us to go down risky paths. Number one, we have to realize that businesses are not inherently, or at least a business owner, and I've been in a couple, you're not inherently motivated to go down risky paths. But the second, your modus operandi, which may have been in person or may have involved the meeting of people in person or the congregation of people, when that changed, your bottom line took a significant hit. Suddenly now you have to move to an operation where you're, let's say, receiving payments online. Let's talk about restaurant chains. Everything has now gone online. Everything has to happen. You got to book orders online, etc. And you just shift to anything that sticks and anything that can be deployed yesterday. That risky behavior, I don't think was ever inherent in many of the businesses. And if it is, you shouldn't be operating a business. But you're desperate at that point. You have to keep people employed. You've got to generate revenue. So there's a lot that happened there, and people did become more risky. And this is just from a business perspective, right? And they had to. Now, it's only after things started happening, like if you remember, and it seems like ages ago, but apparently today is the 3-year anniversary of the first known case of COVID in Canada or in Ontario. I'm not too sure.
Oh.
At that time, a month later into COVID, we started realizing, whoa, there's something called Zoom bombing, right? We just all went to, half the people didn't even know how to use it. I know a lot of people that didn't even know the implications of Zoom on your memory or Teams on your memory. They just used it. Let's see what happens. And then Zoom bombing became a thing. But we had to move quickly. We had no choice. There was no going back. So I think our attitudes have changed a little bit. We'll see it and we'll deal with it later if something happens. And that's a dangerous thing. And we need to, in the words of Ali G, you got to check yourself before you wreck yourself. So that's number one. And I think that's driven a lot of our risky behavior. Here's the second thing, though. I think it's become more and more widespread around the reporting around what's happening with cybersecurity, what's happening with cyber crimes. And you're hearing more and more of so-and-so organization went down, so-and-so individual lost 40,000 in a scam, etc. People are hearing a lot about it. But the thing is that if you go to anyone and you actually ask them, well, what do you need to do? Unless they have a security team, it's very difficult for people to articulate, especially small businesses, in terms of what exactly do we need to do? I have a firewall on my website. Is that sufficient? And I think, from a risk perspective, people are now checking themselves, should I be doing this or not? But the problem is, it's all good and dandy that you can identify that, there are certain things which maybe we shouldn't be doing. But what are your alternatives? And if those alternatives are available, how do you activate them? Yes, large businesses that have dedicated security teams, they did go down a few risky paths, had to keep the lights on, but then they do have security teams that can put in those checks and balances, and they come to relatively a happy medium and a safer medium. But for these individuals that are now checking themselves, where exactly do they go? And then the third element is you look at what's happening from an insurance perspective. And anybody who's paying attention to it, you've probably noticed late 2022 into 2023, underwriters really started changing what they will protect you for or what they will insure you for. When Lloyd's issues a statement saying anything that constitutes an act of war may not, or any attack that is part of an act of war may not be insured, that gets you thinking, that gets you very, very nervous, and you're not too sure exactly what to do. So yes, there's an element of, we've been risky because our economic conditions have kind of pushed us down that path. We are checking ourselves, and some people have the right checks and balances for that. But then there is also this high level of uncertainty. And I will say this repeatedly and repeatedly. This uncertainty is what is really going to keep a lot of business owners and a lot of institutions awake, because and you heard the adage, it's not if, it's when an attack happens. Okay, when it happens, but then what do you do in those situations? And I do feel a lot of organizations now are going to start looking at their BCP practices and say, if this happens, how do we get back up live, and how do we just limit the blast zone? Accept it as a reality that these things are going to happen, and are going to happen quite frequently now. It's basically, and a colleague of mine brought this really interesting adage to me. He said, look, when you're driving a car, you do know that an accident could happen, but then you do have like, I can rent a car or whatever, but it could happen. right? And you prepare and you think in that way. And I think cybersecurity and cyber threats and cyber attacks are going to fall into that mental space for a lot of small businesses. Large businesses, again, we can continue the conversation on it, but that's sort of where my predictions are going right now. And I really do feel that as a provincial team, we've got a mandate now to start empowering a lot of these owners and a lot of these users with, well, what's your playbook going to look like? I'll quote one thing very quickly in 30 seconds. I don't remember who I was speaking to. Maybe it was Kalyan from the region of Durham, or it was George Alcura, and we were having this from Ruby Life. We were having this conversation. We said, you know what? Now you might even get into conversations where people wonder, from a personal perspective, should they be having an elevated level of cyber insurance as well, right? Yes, you have things that protect your ID, your identity theft, etc. But are there other things that we need to be aware of, especially if you're working out of a home office? So risky, yes. Identifying the risk to a degree, how exactly do you respond to that risk? I don't think people are as equipped as others, and we need to bring some equity into the space.
Absolutely. There's definitely a correlation between your overall attitude, especially when it comes pertaining to cyber crime or cybersecurity on a business or organizational scale. The measure of impulses you have towards cybersecurity, and then the risky cybersecurity behavior scale, right? So, but I think that in terms of an individual's attitude towards cybersecurity in general and our differences may be a good base to really govern some good cybersecurity practices. And the uncertainty that you highlight there, Ali, really draws in the need for us to focus directly on more effective training while, beefing up our awareness mechanisms in general. But speaking on the topic of cyber insurance, which is a huge topic for this year, and I think it's going to continue to, of course, grow here, do you predict that there's going to be any maybe threats that may end up becoming uninsurable at any point?
Well, yeah, I referenced Lloyd's previously, right? And the whole act of war. I'm not an insurance expert by any stretch of imagination, but I'm going to do a plug for CISO Forum, which is where I'll be doing a session with Arctic Wolf and Octavia from Equifax, where we'll be discussing some of these trends. So for those of you that are attending, that I'll be the moderator, so I'll get to listen and learn, and so will you. So please consider joining that session. It's on Monday, I believe. But then two things that I'll mention over here. The first thing is cyber insurance as an industry is, I heard this in another session, it's not even old enough to drink, right? It's a very young industry, right? So you are learning and sort of building the plane as you're trying to fly it, right? There's a lot that's changed over the last 3 years. Now, because of the relatively the youthfulness of this industry, you're going to see it move in a lot of different directions, almost spasmodically. Ooh, squirrel. Oh, the next shiny thing. Oh, I want to try that. I want to try that. You're going to see that mentality to a degree. But I can't say with certainty if there are going to be things that are going to be uninsurable, but I will say this, and I know a lot of people can attest to this. You're going to find yourself having to prove that you have certain measures in place quite literally. You can and again, I'm not an insurance expert, but I'll advance this position that you can say that, yeah, my house has this and my house has, 500 egress windows or whatever have you, right? And that makes it less risky. Sure, that reduces the risk. Okay. But nobody's going to come and check. Should something happen and those windows are not there, well, guess what? You lied. I don't think you're going to see that parlay directly in cyber insurance anymore. You're going to see that they're going to ask for evidence. And this means you need people on your team who not just understand tech, i.e., you don't just need coders, you need people who understand the programmatic elements of it. Have you gone ahead and implemented MFA? Yes, we have. That means nothing. We have on these product lines or on these activities or for these departments. But these don't speak, for example, to other third-party tools that they may be using for other activities. Every team has a variety of tools. If you say, yes, we have MFA, it's assumed it's across all of them. But if you go and tell me we're using a particular product for design like Canva and it doesn't have MFA or your form of MFA, that's what you need to articulate. And you're going to have to, as a security team, get into those depths. I've said this many times before. There is no shortage of security talent, but there's a shortage of security talent that can communicate and collaborate well. And boy, oh boy, in 2023, are insurance folks going to put you to the test. I have heard stories of, I guess you'll call them investigators, but really they're consultants showing up on-prem, saying, show us what you got before we underwrite this. Hey, if you don't know how to show that stuff, it's all talk and fluff and you ain't going to get insured. So that's number one. The industry is sharpening up from that regard. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing, from at least if I look at it from a technical perspective. But there is a second piece to this, which I think we need to start paying very close attention to. How does the insurance industry understand the level of exposure or the impact of a particular risk? You and I, if you do your research, yes, we've heard in 2022, it took about 45 extra days in 2022 to recover from a pretty impressive, if you will, ransomware attack, or a pretty detrimental ransomware attack. Sure. What was the impact of that? We would know for our organization what the impact is that. How will the insurance industry read the potential impact of that and the costs associated with that, and how that translates into your premium is going to be an area of study we all have to be paying attention to. And if the siberX team is listening, and I'll call out Maddie on this, shout out to him, we need to have discussions on this topic, if not a dedicated day on this. Bring in the insurance providers, bring in the partners. We need to support that understanding. I say this all the time in my classes, and I'm teaching one at 1:30. I say this all the time, folks. If there's a fire in a semi-detached or a detached home, you can examine, knowing the price of lumber, knowing the price of equipment, how much that's going to cost. And depending on the location of that home, if it's a townhouse, the fire could spread. So more people could get impacted, the blast zone increases. Those are very tangible quantitative facts that you can use to determine what that premium needs to be. How do you do that from an insurance in a security perspective? And I think it would be absolutely lazy of us to turn around and point the fingers at, well, let the insurance industry determine that. There are some good players out there that would like to talk to us when we need to get more collaborative about it and play a role in that. And again, I think the folks at the province, the folks at siberX, all of the leaders that are coming out to CISO Forum, you are well positioned for that.
Absolutely. I think especially with cyber insurance, it's such an interesting field or area to really explore, because it's really protecting your businesses against our cybersecurity risks and data breaches. And with cybersecurity risks, it's a little bit of crystal ball gazing, right? It's a risk really exposing really no modern businesses or organizations can escape. And then we've talked about the financial impact of cybercrime, the business interruptions that it causes, and the privacy events are now felt pretty much in every single industry because of it. So it'll be a very interesting take. And again, I'm really looking forward to your session next week to the CISO Forum held on January 30th and 31st, found on the siberX site. So Ali, I think I've mentioned this, but I recently went on a trip to Asia, and it was actually to my surprise that many of the applications and accounts are using passwordless authentication. So that really means that instead of using typical use of letters, characters, and numbers that we're used to using to access our accounts, there are other ways to really verify a user's identity. So instead of using things like biometrics, such as your fingerprints, possession factors such as authenticator apps, or even magic links where a user will enter the email and a link will be sent to them to grant access. Now, Ali, do you really foresee any additional push towards passwordless authentication in a bid that thwart quantum attacks?
That's a loaded question, my friend. The kind of question which I put in an exam and my students failed me in my reviews. All my students.
I asked that purposely because I knew your students were on board. I'm just kidding.
Dear students, please be kind to rate my professors. You have hurt me enough. No, I joke. I love my students, and they're the reason I do what I do. So a couple of things, and before I answer that, I see Graham Berry has responded in the chat, and he made a really important. Those are the kind of statements you put on a shirt. Jokes aside, he says, the industry, and I'll read it from here. The industry will settle once they start getting actuarial data, and I agree. And this is something me and Graham have spoken about, is we need to share, and we need to have these forums. And Maddie's on as well, and he said done. So Maddie, let's work on it. Happy to support. Now, Julie, if you allow me, I'll need a couple of minutes just to dissect that question, because you spoke about passwordless, and then you accompanied it with quantum, right? And I agree, hot topics, and you're hearing a lot. The Canadian Quantum Strategy, quite a lot of money just got invested through the amazing Perimeter Institute, and so on and so forth. A couple of things that I want to dissect over here. The first thing is, what actually is this whole notion of a quantum computer. All right. I haven't had a chance to work with one, but I'll make a couple of comments. Your traditional machines operate, well, this beautiful beast that I have created over 9 months operates over 0110 binary at the end of the day, right? Now, that is on the basics of how the transistors can move particles and move energy, so on and so forth. That's as far as my physics will take me. But when it comes to quantum, you're now not working with 0110 or combination thereof. You're working with both bits or what you call qubits simultaneously. This gives it much more power. Think of 0110 as the alphabets of a computer, just like we have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and any combinations of that work to give us language. 0110, etc., does the same in a computer's brain. Now, when you take that language and you make it 10 times or even 50 times more powerful by combining its capacities, you now have a computer that can do much, much more than your traditional computer. Now, that's why people say, and if you look at Canada's quantum strategy, you'll see that the push is towards this will allow us to quicker get to some insights and data. This will allow us to crunch data sets much more faster. The faster you can do it, the more effectively you can do it, the more insights you can generate. So there's a huge opportunity with quantum, but you have to understand quantum is a much more powerful computer, which will allow us to do much more. So to the audience, it's just like if you get a strong machine with strong CPU, strong RAM, strong GPU, you can do much more. That's what quantum exactly is all about. Now, why is there this talk about we need to go passwordless? Well, I'll tell you why. When you have credentials online, we employ a mechanism, and this may sound like I'm in elementary security school, but we do cryptography to hide the keys to ensure that the conversation happening between the two of us is happening between the two of us, and nobody else who doesn't have that key can see that conversation. Great. But there are ways in which you can penetrate that conversation and guess the keys and get in. That's why the worry emerges from quantum. And now you hear a lot of talk about quantum safe encryption. Because when you add in AI models, when you add in automation, when you add in scripts that are able to consistently try different keys, try different combinations in multiple ways, there's more power to potentially guess and crack through traditional encryption methodologies. Traditional cryptography has to shift, and that's why you're hearing of things like quantum safe encryption. And this is not something that is way ahead. This is talking about tomorrow's business needs today. And people were talking about this. I remember 2021 CISO Forum and 2022, and they were ahead of the curve. So good on them, because now it's become a reality. Now, will passwordless necessarily change or completely thwart quantum attacks? I hate to say this, Bud, but if you think that way, you're smoking something really expired, because that is not the intention here. The move behind passwordless is because passwords themselves can be inherently, they possess a lot more risk. And we have become, as a society, much more aware of the risks of maintaining these keyword passwords. So the move towards a one-time magic link, the move towards authenticating you through biometrics, the words through authenticator apps like something like a BlockSec sponsored CISO forum, this is going to happen because we recognize the risk involved. But does that suggest that passwordless alone is now going to thwart against quantum attacks? No. There are other reasons. Passwords are one element of it. Start thinking just with basic cybersecurity knowledge. With quantum in the hands of someone who is a bad actor, the ability of what you could do from a brute force perspective has just quadrupled times 100. Whatever that number may be, I don't even know if it exists, but it's just gone much more aggressive. Yes, we will move towards new authentication models. And I think it's a good thing. And I think we need to consistently think about this thing that I've said before. I connect, therefore I am, is not the same as I am, that I think, therefore I am. It's not the same. You connect, therefore you are? No, you connect, we still need to validate you. And zero trust is now becoming a much more than just like a fancy word. It's becoming a practice. Passwordless will fit in very neatly into that. But it does not thwart against what could potentially happen with more and more powerful machines, quantum or not, but quantum specifically, coming into the market. Nation state actors will use it. It can get weaponized very, very strongly. And hence you're seeing the investments that we have. So yes, that's my perspective on it. I think it's a good path to go down. Not every organization is going to be ready for it. It comes down to user experience. It comes down to how long your clients will stay on a site. It comes down to, are you enforcing this from an internal team's perspective, or are you enforcing it on your users? You cannot make it simple, but you can make it seamless. And these are some of the UX UI challenges that we're going to face when it comes to passwordless and are already facing. And this is why I always say cybersecurity is one of the most interdisciplinary subjects you could imagine. So if you're thinking that you don't have quote unquote programming skills, but you want to get into cyber, I just told you abundance of reasons why you want to get into it. So that's my take, Lady Lee.
That's a great way to respond to that heavy loaded question there, Ali. Very much thank you for clarifying. So yes, are we seeing a huge push towards passwordless authentication? Yes, but no to the fact that it would actually thwart quantum attacks. Thumbs up if you agree with me, if Ali answered that question very well for some users out there who might be curious on that question. As I'm looking at the time here, we are ready for our last prediction of the day, and I wanted to dive into the certification world and what your thoughts are on cybersecurity certifications are.
Yeah.
Are there any prediction for where the cybersecurity certification world might be headed? In your opinion?
Well, please be headed to stay in business, otherwise I don't have a job. But here's what I'll say. Oh, and I'm gonna get a little philosophical on me. I'm gonna have my Gandhi moment. So here's what I'm gonna say. All right. The first thing is, education doesn't give you the answers. It shows you where to look. And when it comes to certifications, the number one question I get asked by most people, if I get the certification, what kind of job will I get? If that's your question, at least if you come to me, you're not getting any job, right? I'm just being brutally honest about it. Certifications, like I know Graham Barry's on, like my good friend Graham Barry would say, is part of a continuous learning journey, all right? And we need to respect that. Whether it's the certifications or writing a book, which you were a part of, I was a part of, The Art of Cybersecurity Sales, it's all part of that process of learning something new, etc. So just as a sidebar comment, I will say to everybody listening, these certifications just show you where you need to look at for certain concepts and how to look at things from a different perspective and better. At the end of the day, you still have to put in the work. You still have to do what everybody else does and let the rubber hit the road. Now, where do I see this industry going? I see four things happening in this industry. Number one, you are going to see new forms of certifications emerge, which potentially deal with the administrative side and the operational side of security. And I think you will see that administrative professionals, marketing professionals, supply chain operational folks are going to start seeing certifications that are catered towards them. We've seen it in the privacy industry. You're seeing some certifications and standards emerge. And I think you're going to see more disciplines and more practices, more specific skill sets having certain security designations that are tied to standards. So I think it's going to become very, very apparent. You're going to need some of these certifications. Plus, remember, I've said this before. I've been in conversations at the board level. Someone said, what do you do for security? Oh, we do this, we do that, we do this. And you have the operational person saying it. Sure, but against what did you map it to, right? And sure, you may not want to take an HR person into the depths of ISO or COBIT or whatever have you, but there's going to be some form of frameworks that they can adapt and they can deploy. That's number one. Number two, when it comes to certifications, I think you are going to see more emphasis on the implementations of things like CTFs and bug bounties into the actual certifications itself. Real-time, real-life experiences. I know Minute School, siberX, BlockSec are all hosting a CTF at Toronto School of Management. I think these kind of things, hack the boxes times 10, are all going to become part of your general certification journey. You're going to see there's going to be a demand to have simulations in them, real-time exercises incorporated into them, so people can genuinely take on those roles and see the results of what they're doing. Tabletop exercises, we all practice them, we all play them in different ways. I think certifications are going to have to adopt and adapt to that model and not just be theory-centric. But then my next two are predictions, which, and again, I don't want to point out one particular certification over the other, but I am going to say this. The certifications that do not necessarily check their valuations properly will start to get dropped. I really do feel that if you are not going to, it's not a question about pricing competitively or showing value or whatever have you. You are going to see that folks now have other ways to demonstrate their knowledge and demonstrate their skills. People now take to streaming. People now take to their Git repos. People now take to other forms to demonstrate what they know. And I think certifications are going to have to keep pace with that. There is going to be a need to realize that as more and more people also take these certifications on their own dime and on their own investments, that cost prohibitiveness is going to factor in. And those certifications that don't necessarily come out competitive, I think will get dropped and will become the exclusive domain of very few, which may make those certifications even more high valued. I don't know. But if I'm talking about the mass adoption, then that's what I think is going to happen there. And that's standard. But again, now with 2023 and the economy, I think that's where you're going to see it going. And then there's one more thing that I would say about certifications. At least from a Canadian perspective, I am desperate to see some sort of a certification, which I think will emerge, which brings in cross-cultural security practices and brings in experiences from not other domains of cyber, but other geographical locations within which cyber is practiced. I've said this before, I'm a big believer in we should be having exchange programs. And we should be adopting programs where our teams train here and then go to Tel Aviv or go to Dubai, wherever it may be, go to the Bahamas, wherever it is, to experience different conditions. And I think certifications that can bring that global perspective and take the local perspectives global, as Thomas Friedman would call localize, is where you're going to see some really interesting opportunities emerge. Will people continue to go after certifications? Yes, and so they should. They are proven standards, and it is a measure of what you know. But people are not going to just look at what you know. They're going to want to look at where do you look at? Where does your mind go when something happens? And how do you troubleshoot? Especially now that no 2 days are the same anymore. It never was before, and now even more so. So that's where I see this going. It's going to get interesting, as is everything else.
Absolutely. I just took that note piece down there that you said, Ali, in terms of certifications, crossing cultural practices. It's exactly what we do here at a smaller scale at the Ontario Center of Excellence. Really cross collaboration without duplicating efforts, sharing ideas, advice and guidance. Why not expand it out to different geographics with different exchange programs? But our last question is a question that I asked to all guests. I'll make it a bit easier for you now in terms of what is the best cybersecurity advice you can give or have ever received. And my friend, last time you came on the show, you mentioned that the best advice you received is from Mark Dillon. And you quoted him, just as a reminder to our viewers as well, saying, don't trust a computer that you can't throw out of the window. And you shared with us that cybersecurity is about visibility and transparency. It's important for everyone to know all the ins and outs of everything we use. And I think that was some really great advice that I took into consideration myself. But can you share some other advice that you've learned and that might help everyone as they enter this new year?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll do a shout out as well if that's well, I've been doing it, but I'll do it nonetheless. So the quote was, "It's never too late to be early." And I actually used this inside the second iteration of Cyber Exchange in 2020 at the St. Francis Center. But the person who shared this with me is someone who's been very instrumental in my career going forward, and that is the CIO from Laurentian University, Luc Roy. He was very essential to my work when I was at Orion, along with many other players in that field. And when we were talking about it, we were talking about the shared CISO program, etc. He said it's never too late to be early. Now, what did he mean by that? We're seeing things based on the data that we have, the knowledge that we have, the energy that we have, enthusiasm that we have of what could be coming. Nobody knows with certainty. But predictions are not about getting it right. Predictions about being prepared. You predicted there was going to be 30 centimeters of snow. 10 fell. Okay, but you were prepared. Should something have happened, you had your every department covered. It's the same thing in security, right? Someone might wonder, oh, you're taking it a little too far with all of this MFA, or trying to consolidate all of our data residency practices, or you're trying to push a new form of authentication, etc. Nobody's going to want to do this now. Well, I'll be very honest with you. 4 years ago, if you told everyone we would be spending a majority of our time on Zoom, nobody would want to do it. Well, you had no choice at a certain time. Should there be a certain kind of nation state attack and we need to be prepared, this is what you're going to need to know. Some people may feel that that is a little too ahead, that may not happen, but never too late to be early. You'll be very, very happy that you had a plan in place. And he was talking to me about this when he was citing pandemic preparedness plans. I think the stat was, and don't quote me on this, 10% of companies in downtown core had some form of pandemic preparedness plan. And Luke mentioned, he said, this is in lieu of the fact that in 2009, we did have something like COVID. It was called swine flu. And there was, when I flew back to Dubai for the holidays, shout out to my family in Dubai. I kid you not, there was scanning happening at that time. I was a lot younger then, and I was like, whatever, I'm just here to Dubai to party, right? But it was happening, right? It's like, we did see it. These hand sanitization stations started to emerge. The Purell hand sanitizer dispensers started to emerge late 2009. That was the Christmas gift to our campus. It was there. But we didn't really think that this would happen again. Some organizations did have a plan and moved very quickly. Never too late to be early. And I think that's it goes with the spirit of predictions. It goes with the spirit of how should we be planning going forward into what's going to be an interesting year, but a very spasmodic year as well.
Thanks very much, Ali, for that piece of advice. It's never too early to, of course, to be prepared, especially when it comes to cybersecurity. Now it's time to move over to the questions that we have been waiting for. Let's move over to our chat, and feel free at this point to answer to start adding in any of your questions or comments.
Yep.
First question here on the list that we see here is, have you experienced using AI for cybersecurity before, or how or what happened? I think we have touched on this already,
Yep.
Ali, but anything you would like to add to this?
Yeah, in my early days, 2019, just before the pandemic became a reality, I was working actually on a product at the center, which basically installed an agent that was creating a baseline. There were two lessons learned. Number one, damn, are these servers expensive? It was my first foray into managing logs from multiple environments. The compute cycles are quite expensive, and that exposed me to computing environments which we have across the province, like SOSIP and Compute Ontario, so on and so forth. So that was a good lessons learned. The second thing is that the false positives really emerge from the baselines that you establish. Garbage in, garbage out. You really have to know what you're taking in and training your models with. And that really helped me with also as I evaluated other products, like SentinelOne and a couple of others that really deploy a lot of AI into their fabric. It really got me to ask the right questions and build better relationships with partners and vendors. So those are my two quick lessons learned. There's much more, but those are two that I can share with you off the bat.
All right. Our next one goes back to you, Ali. Can you explain how automation is different from genuinely using AI?
Yeah, absolutely. So automation is exactly what you're seeing with this diffuser over here. You click a button and it automatically does a process. It does a function, right? You automate, you make seamless something that typically required a couple of inputs. Now it just happens through a sensory trigger or through a trigger which is an on-off switch, 0101, like this over here. That's automation. And process automation is a fancy way, but it's basically something that was complex. You've automated it now. You don't necessarily need a human being to consistently place something within a particular sensor zone or a particular target. It's automated, right? Conveyor belt like logic, but automated. When it comes to AI, I'll go back to what I've always said. It's not about telling the machine what to do. It's about giving the machine lots of data and getting it to give you the best answer. Now, what does that mean from genuinely using AI? Genuinely using AI is a product that is learning at the same time and is being contextually aware. Today, that heavy load of traffic with those IP addresses could potentially be a DDoS attack. Tomorrow, the same type of traffic might be because everybody's logging in to watch Julia Lee's show, and it's aware of that context. That is where the AI piece comes in. And I will say this again and again, and I don't care if any vendor or partner hears me. A lot of folks can sell you snake oil when it comes to AI. There's a reason in the UK, 80% of startups using AI never genuinely had AI. And I can tell you that any of those founders never got seed funding again. So if you don't know what AI is, don't pretend like it's there. And unless you can show it and define it from an ethical AI perspective, please don't do that.
Certainly, we've got a few more questions for you, Ali, on AI. Very hot topic here today. Ethical AI, is a growing topic. How do we ensure that the biases in AI programs we use are inclusive and responsive and responsible?
Yeah, good question. I'll reword it a little bit. I'll say, besides ethical AI, you want to be focusing on a term that's called XAI, explainable AI. We need to have the ability to explain how a decision was made by a particular AI model. Now, how do we ensure that we limit our bias, etc.? The best way to do that is to look at the data that your models are ingesting. But there is something else, all right? And I hold very strongly to this. If you don't necessarily need a form of AI to do some form of work, then you don't need it. If, for example, you're triaging 20 patients a day and you have the time to triage them and build that relation, do it. But if there is a need where you can create effectiveness using AI, that's one way. When you identify the effectiveness, that's one way where you can limit that bias. Is that, do we actually need this? And there are ways to measure that. That's why you have digital transformation specialists that come in to help you assess that. And that's why we leverage some of those skills in the Ontario market to determine, do we actually genuinely need this? And I advise you, go and look at how many stop-start initiatives there have been in AI, because people drive towards, ooh, AI. The same thing with ChatGPT will do this, ChatGPT will do that. Yeah, okay, what's the effectiveness? Let's get to that point very quickly. So that's what I would say, is focus on the XAI, the explainable AI piece, and that should drive into the ethical AI components. Now, you will see a lot of principles and a lot of standards being thrown out now in AI, a lot of protocols that have been shared, and people are signing on to different suggestions. I think you're going to see some formality in this space, and we'll wait to see if government creates any standards around this.
Absolutely. Our next question here, I'm just going to combine the two questions.
Yeah.
Do you think quantum will affect IAM? And what about Web 3.0? Can it be hacked after quantum computing has been launched?
Yeah, great questions. And yesterday, I think, or Monday, we had a session with leading cyber ladies on Web 3.0, decentralized systems, etc. Look, anything that lives on a server somewhere and is connected to the internet, with the emergence of quantum, like I said before, the power of those computers, it will affect those systems if in the wrong hands. It will change the way in which attacks are launched. How quickly will we start seeing this change? Well, it depends on how quickly these items scale. I always go back to AI, right? AI has been in existence since the 1960s, the 1970s. Went through a bit of a winter AI moment because it was very expensive and you couldn't scale it. There will come a point where quantum computers will scale. It will happen, all right? If history means anything, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but a couple of days after tomorrow, it will scale. You will start having access to it, and it will impact all of these systems. So that's the very simple way to. How will it impact Web 3.0 systems? Depending on the type of blockchain that you're using, depending on the type of tokenization that you're using, it depends, right? It depends on what keys are in place. So each beast is going to be different. But that question about nation state, I want to be careful and I want to punctuate my response to this by saying this much. Pay attention to which countries have invested in quantum. Pay attention to who has research labs in quantum. And it's going to be a matter of, in my opinion at least, a matter of federal security to determine the countries that have access to this power and to this level of compute, what are their governmental frameworks like and what are their ideologies like. That will give you a sense of whether or not these tools will land up in sandboxes that they shouldn't be in. And I think, with the quantum strategy that the federal government has put forward, there's also some very strict protocols around who has access to what capacities. And I think we do a good job in Ontario of that, and in Canada in general. And I think we have to pay attention to how will these sandboxes be made available. And if it becomes a free-for-all, it will get very, very interesting to see how the geographical identities of attacks begin to change. And of course, you've heard this many times, cyber wars, etc., are just the normal currency now. We fight in cyberspace. This will be the newest and fanciest nuclear moment that we all need to be prepared for to a degree. I don't see it happening 2023. Maybe, a little bit more than that. I can't give you an exact number, but it is something we need to be following and we need to be aware of. And I commend the federal government for moving quickly on a strategy and putting in some monies. And hopefully we have good administration around that to realize some effective milestones and goals.
For sure. Now, moving on from the topic of AI and quantum, is moving into cyber insurance, and if we need to consider cyber insurance for personal matters. And I'll start off by saying cyber criminals has plenty of entry points. to use in order to really wreak havoc on your life and your finances, whether it's through your computers, your phones, your gaming systems, your home devices. They're all really potentially susceptible to a cyber attack. And cyber insurance companies are now growing in terms of that service of offering personal cyber insurance for folks to really help cover some of those risks. Ali, what's your take on this one?
Yeah, my couple of rupees on that one is yes, I think you really need to be thinking about some forms of insurance, but I'm going to say this with a little extra salt, if you will. Insurances are insurances. At the end of the day, if something happens, you still have to claim it. You got to prove, and there's a bit of a process. Here's what I'll tell you. In my home, I have a BCP strategy. I know what to do if there's, heaven forbid, a fire. If I have elderly parents, if something happens, I know what to do. I know what numbers to call. If the cat's unwell, I know what to do. Right? It's just what it is. Right? I think you need to know the same from a cyber perspective. If, for example, we notice we can't log into our home router, or we notice that this has happened where all of our smart devices are making a weird noise or giving us an icon which we've never seen before. What do we do in those situations? Can we operate like I've had this conversation with my family, which was a very weird one, but I did it nonetheless, because having this conversation with my mom was very awkward. For her, she says like, son, as long as you don't appear on the Jerry Springer show, life is good, right? Nothing else can go wrong. But I have to explain it to her that, if, let's say, we're not at home and the internet goes down, and the disaster that happened in July where you couldn't even make phone calls, what do you do in that situation, right? And we had those conversations, and my family was quite prepared. We kind of knew what to do. We did have a backup phone in our house, which was not on any of the providers that we typically have. All of us are on one provider or two, and we had one with a completely different provider that doesn't touch, hopefully, any of those networks. And that's what kept us connected to a degree. That's what allowed us to understand what was happening. That's what allowed us to get one of our parents to their appointments. So I think you're going to have to think about, from a personal perspective, what is your BCP strategy? What is your DR strategy as a family or as an individual? And these conversations should no longer be awkward to have. It's just like having a fire preparedness plan in your house.
Absolutely. Just predicting and having those backup plans.
Absolutely.
At this time here, it concludes our Cyber Talk session. Again, Ali, thanks very much for coming back onto our show and giving your time and your advice. And to those of you who have watched and participated, of course, I hope you have all learned a little something about cybersecurity and what 2023 has in store for us. And of course, this isn't certainly all the predictions, and it's not about predictions getting it right. And these are only some perspectives and opinions from Ali and I, and we would love to hear your predictions. So feel free to drop your thoughts in the comments section. And as always, it is important to stay on top of cybersecurity best practices to keep yourself and those around you cyber safe. So I do encourage everyone to keep coming back and learning about cybersecurity with us on the Cyber Talk Show with me, Julia Lee. And at this point here, stay cyber safe, guys, and see you guys soon.
Take care.